Made of pen and ink, she can win you with a wing. Ain't she cute? Sweet Betty.
There are a lot of really messy strings in the intro part of today's episode. I will admit that from the jump, but I've compiled research to the best of my ability. When it comes to cinematic icons that had baby boomers enthralled, to the point that this character is still popular almost 100 years after her creation, none of them are as controversial yet beloved as the first animated sex symbol in history, Betty Boop. Created in the 1930s by Max Fleischer, Betty Boop made her first appearance in the cartoon Dizzy Dishes, released on August 9, 1930, the seventh installment in Fleischer's Talkertoon series. Inspired by a popular performing style, but not by any one specific person, the character was originally created as an anthropomorphic French poodle, which is as disturbing as you'd imagine it would be. Within a year, Betty made the transition from a human canine breed to a completely human female character. While much credit has been given to Grim Natwick for helping to transform Max Fleischer's creation, her transition into the female form was also in part due to the work of Benny Wolfe, Seymour Needle, Doc Crandall, Willard Bowski, and James Seamus Culhane. By the release of Any Rags, Betty Boop was forever established as a human character. Her floppy poodle ears became hoop earrings, and her black poodle nose became a girl's button-like nose. Clara Bow is often given credit as being the inspiration for Boop, though Max Fleischer told his artist that he wanted a caricature of singer Helen Kane, who performed in a style shared by many performers of the day. In 1932, Kane filed a lawsuit against Max Fleischer and Paramount for damages of $250,000, which is almost $5 million inflated for 2021. The lawsuit alleged infringement, unfair competition, and exploitation of her personality and image. Before his death, cartoonist Grim Natwick admitted he had designed a young girl based upon a photo of Kane, and that Margie Hines, Mae Questel, Bonnie Poe, Little Ann Little, and Kate Wright, who provided the voice for Betty Boop, had all taken part in a 1929 Paramount contest, which was a search for a Helen Kane impersonator. But there is great irony in the lawsuit that Helen Kane brought to Fleischer Studios, and that is because Helen was no angel when it came to thievery. Esther Baby Esther Lee Jones was born in Chicago somewhere between 1918 and 1921 to Gertrude and William Jones. From an early age, Esther showed a natural talent for performing. Her parents encouraged and involved Esther in singing and dancing competitions as a small child, and when she was around 5 years old, she competed in a Charleston dance competition in Chicago. Esther won first prize and attracted the attention of a white talent manager named Lou Walton, sometimes mistakenly referred to as Lou Bolton. After her big win, Walton offered to represent Jones as her talent agent, and her parents agreed. Esther Jones began performing in mostly whites-only clubs throughout Chicago, New York, and other major cities in the Northeast, becoming a big hit with white audiences who were ensnared by her childlike charm and impressive singing ability. She danced and sang songs, occasionally performing in racist-ass minstrel shows alongside white men in blackface to the delight of crowds. In most venues that Jones attended, black people were not permitted unless they were there to perform. In the years that Esther Jones was active in the show business, Jim Crow laws had wormed their way into all parts of American society. The KKK experienced a resurgence in national membership and found an outpouring of support from elected officials. Mob lynchings continued to terrorize people of color, and the justice system favored whites at the expense of black lives. At an early point in her career, Esther Jones introduced a boop-boop-a-doop singing style into her performance. This baby voice, scatting style dazzled jazz-age audiences and gained her critical acclaim wherever she performed. Jones is believed to be one of the first singers to incorporate boop-boop-a-doop scatting, though that notion is fraught with controversial history as well. Jones was known by many stage names before she gained her famous Baby Esther moniker. She was called Little Esther, Farina's kid sister, and Miniature Florence Mills, which referenced other black performers of the era. With her parents and manager in tow, Esther continued to travel and perform in major cities in the U.S., attracting a growing number of fans wherever she went. At the time, the Baltimore newspaper The Afro-American reported that Jones was believed to be the highest paid child artist in the world. At the time, she was making $750 a week. With inflation in 2021, that's nearly $12,000 a week. One New York venue that Esther Esther Jones regularly performed in was the Cotton Club in Harlem. The Cotton Club could be an essay in and of itself, but let me give you a quick rundown. In 1920, heavyweight boxing champion Jack the Galveston Giant Johnson rented the upper floor of the building on the corner of 142nd Street and Lenox Avenue in the heart of Harlem and opened an intimate supper club called the Club Deluxe. In 1923, Oni Madden, a prominent bootlegger and gangster, took over the club after his release from Sing Sing, where he spent 7 years of a 10 to 20 year sentencing for manslaughter, and changed the name to the Cotton Club. The two arranged a deal that allowed Johnson to remain the club's manager. Madden used the Cotton Club as an outlet to sell his #1 beer to the Prohibition crowd. The Cotton Club was a whites-only establishment, with rare exceptions for black celebrities such as Ethel Waters and Bill Robinson. It reproduced the racist imagery of the era, often depicting black people as savages in the exotic jungles or the plantation south, with the menu depicting imagery showing naked black men and women dancing around a drum in the jungle, tribal mask illustrations making up the border of the menu. Bandleader Duke Ellington was expected to write jungle music for a white audience, and Ellington's contributions to the Cotton Club were priceless. As described in this 1937 New York Times excerpt, so long may the empirical Duke and his music making roosters rain, and long may the Cotton Club continue to remember that it came down from Harlem. Entry was expensive for customers, at $2.50 a piece, with inflation that's about $40 a pop in 2021, and on top of that, on weekdays there was a $2 minimum cover fee, $32 in 2021, so the performers were well compensated. One night in 1928, Esther Jones was set to perform, and who was sitting front row center? Why, Miss Helen Kane. Now, it is worth noting that this performance is rumored to have also maybe taken place at the Everglades Club. Helen Kane was a former vaudeville performer and was very active in the New York City musical scene when she first saw Esther Jones on stage. Kane then directly copied Jones's boop boop ba-doop singing into her own acts and claimed the style as her own. Later that year, Kane released I Want to Be Loved by You, which was the first song that incorporated Jones's boop boop ba-doop singing style.
I wanna be loved by you, love,
The song reached immediate commercial success, and her national profile as a jazz-age singer soared. She continued to take advantage of the style and incorporated it into all of her future performances. Kane never publicly acknowledged Esther Jones as the originator of the boop boop ba-doop scatting, the very reason she was popular to begin with. Kane even went so far as to argue in court that she had created the scatting all by herself. The aforementioned lawsuit was already not going well for Helen, and then a 1928 film reel was brought into court. It showed Esther Jones performing her trademark boop boop ba-doop on stage months before Kane's hit single was released. Helen Kane lost the lawsuit on May 5, 1934. Despite being one of the main reasons that Helen Kane's case was dismissed, Esther Jones was never called to testify. Now a teenager, she had returned to America after doing a tour in South America and was performing in the States at the time of the lawsuit. Though Paramount admitted that Betty Boop's singing style was based on Baby Esther,
oh, brother, this guy stinks!
the studio never offered her a cent. The studio argued in court that it did not owe compensation to Jones because she had disappeared from the public spotlight and was presumed dead. But Esther Jones was very much alive and still active in show business at the time. Paramount simply refused to give money to a black performer they owed a lot of their success to. She left the limelight before becoming a legal adult, and unfortunately that is all the information we have about Baby Esther. True to the era, everything that we know about Esther Jones's life is linked with her entertainment of white crowds. And that's fucked up, especially because to this day, people still credit Helen Kane as the end-all be-all for the inspiration for Betty Boop's voice. A creation stolen from a black woman who was never given her due because of the color of her skin. A child star that rivaled Shirley Temple's popularity has all but been erased by the racist past, present, and future of America. And I'm sure by now you're wondering what the hell any of this has to do with Cab Calloway and or St. James Infirmary. Give me some time, and you'll see how the Cotton Club and Betty Boop are huge parts of the story, as we take a look at Cab Calloway's past and his 1930s take on the heart-wrenching
Folks, I'm going down to St. James Infirmary.
Hello to all you crap-shooting pallbearers, and welcome back to Heard It in a Love Song, the show where we take a look into the history of a love song we all know and love. My name is Richard Hunt, and as we hit our 4th episode of 5 episodes this month, we're taking a look at one of my favorite songs by one of my favorite performers, Cab Calloway's interpretation of St. James Infirmary Blues.
This program is coming to you from the Cotton Club in Harlem, New York City. Now, Cab Calloway, the Prince of Hi-de-Ho, will entertain you with some hotshot razzmatazz.
We start our tale in Rochester, New York on Christmas Day 1907. That is where and when we meet up with Cab Calloway Jr., a lawyer, and his wife, a teacher named Martha Elulia Reed. These two were just given a very special Christmas present, Cab Calloway III, new younger brother to Blanche Dorothea, who was born in February 1902. When he was 11, his family moved to Baltimore, Maryland, where his father not only practiced law, but now sold real estate. And although they held respectable jobs, Calloway's family were less than well off due to the discriminatory pay of the time. Cab Calloway grew up as an adolescent in a comfortable middle-class household in West Baltimore's Sugar Hill area, which was considered the political, cultural, and business hub of black society. Soon, Blanche and Cab would be joined by siblings Elmer and Bernice. Growing up in Baltimore, a young Cab Calloway sang in the Bethlehem Methodist Episcopal Church, finding his voice very early on. Young Cab enjoyed singing in church, but he was expected to follow in his father's footsteps and study law. He also began taking voice lessons around the same time. Calloway's father passed away in 1920, and sometime after, his mother remarried to an insurance salesman named John Nelson Fortune, whom the kids would nickname Papa Jack. The pair would have 2 more children, a daughter named Camilla and a son named John Nelson Jr. As a teenager, Calloway was quite boisterous. He often skipped school to earn money by selling newspapers, shining shoes, and cooling down horses at the Pimlico racetrack, where he developed an interest in racing and betting on the horse races. After he was caught playing dice on church steps, John and Martha sent Cab to Downington Industrial and Agricultural School in 1921, a reform school run by his mother's uncle in Chester County, Pennsylvania, about an hour outside of Philadelphia. In 1922, Calloway came home, in his own words, not reformed, but now a man rather than a boy. And seeing that he was self-admittedly not reformed, he continued his various hustlings about town, but he balanced that with some actual responsibility, as while attending Frederick Douglass High School, he did catering jobs while performing exceptionally well in baseball and basketball, playing professional basketball in his senior year with the Baltimore Athenians. But above all that, Cab continued his voice lessons, as music was still the most important thing to him. He shortly thereafter began singing not only in choir, but at several speakeasies, and that is where he began playing with the Johnny Jones Arabian Tent Orchestra, which was a New Orleans-style Dixieland band. It was a pursuit that was discouraged by his mother and older sister. In 1927, Cab and his high school sweetheart, Zelma Steptoe, welcomed to the world a baby girl named Kamei, and Cab also graduated high school. Shortly after his high school graduation in 1927, Cab's older sister Blanche came to Baltimore with a Plantation Days review. Despite the disapproval he had earlier received from his sister, he was able to strike a deal. He would study law in Chicago if she can get him an audition for the review. Over the summer, Cab joined the show, acting as a replacement singer in the quartet. By his own account, while on tour with his sister and her review, he went as wild as a March hare, chasing all the broads in the show. When the tour ended, Cab stayed in Chicago rather than heading back to Baltimore. And it was in Chicago he would live up to his promise that he made to his sister, and he would start studying law at Crane College, which is now known as Malcolm X University. While at Crane College, a rare opportunity presented itself to Cab, as the Harlem Globetrotters came a-knockin' with an offer for him to join their team. However, Cab politely declined, but to his mother's dismay, the offer wasn't turned down so that he could continue studying law. No, he turned it down as he was far more interested in pursuing his music career. At the time, jazz was a monster in Chicago in terms of popularity, and Cab spent a lot of time working nights and weekends singing at the Dreamland Cafe, also known as Bottom's Dreamland Cafe, for Bill Bottom, who reopened the venue in 1917. Dreamland Cafe was part of the wave of black and tan cabarets that opened in the early 20th century across Bronzeville, named after the fact that they drew primarily black and mixed crowds. Dreamland featured an 800-person capacity dance floor and was considered to be one of the premier sites for jazz on the south side of Chicago. From his time at Dreamland, he nabbed a spot as the drummer and house singer at the Sunset Club. At the Sunset Club, Calloway cut his teeth as an understudy for singer Adelaide Hall. It was also at the Sunset that he became friends with the 26-year-old Louis Armstrong, who at the time was playing with the Carol Dickerson Orchestra. Louis would take Cab under his wing and teach him the art of scat, which was a form of singing where the performer would use their mouth as an instrument, making nonsensical syllables as opposed to actual words.
Every night, one eye, shake with right on, cut my dynamite, change your mind,
When the Carol Dickerson Orchestra ended their engagement at the Sunset in 1928, Cab was promoted to the club's MC, and 1 year later, he was appointed to the leader of Sunset's new house band, the Alabamians, making them Cab's first official band. His new life as a bandleader was pretty much the death knell for his time at Creighton College. His new life as a bandleader also brought the ladies around, something Cab was unable to resist. And in July 1928, Cab married Winona Betty Conacher, a marriage he would later describe as a mistake. In the fall of 1929, Cab and his Alabamians took off on a tour that led them to the end-all be-all for jazz bands at the time, New York City, specifically Harlem. In November, the band was invited to play at a Battle of the Bands at the Savoy Ballroom, once described as the heart of Harlem by poet Langston Hughes. Unfortunately, their opening night went horribly. They blamed the failure on not being familiar with the dance music that was popular in Harlem. There was very little battle brought to the Battle of the Bands by the Alabamians, and they lost out to the Missourians. However, the audience outright agreed that Cab was far and beyond the better band leader. Cab disbanded the Alabamians shortly thereafter. His new old friend, Louis Armstrong, recommended Calloway as a replacement singer in the musical revue Connie's Hot Chocolates, and soon afterward, Charles Buchanan, manager of the Savoy Ballroom, asked Calloway to lead the Missourians. Calloway, of course, said yes, renaming them the Cab Calloway Orchestra. In 1931, Cab and his orchestra began alternating performances on the off nights for Duke Ellington's orchestra as the house band at the Cotton Club, eventually replacing Duke when he left the club. Cab Calloway's unique show-stopping theatrics and dancing may have built the show, but he surrounded himself with talented musicians of the time. His orchestra included names such as Benny Payne and Dizzy Gillespie, the brain behind bebop, which was a type of jazz that leaned heavily on improvisation and a fast-paced tempo. Their popularity was greatly enhanced by the twice-weekly live national radio broadcast on NBC from the Cotton Club. Calloway also appeared on Walter Winchell's radio program and with Bing Crosby in his show at the New York's Paramount Theater. As a result of these appearances, Cab Calloway broke the major broadcast network color barrier. During the depths of the Great Depression, Calloway was earning about $50,000 a year at just 23 years old. Inflated for 2021, that is about $900,000 a year. It was at this time that Cab also began his recording career. Some of his first efforts were released by Brunswick Records. Some of the recordings were Reefer Man.
Have you ever met that funny reefer man? Reefer man. Oh, that funny, funny, funny reefer man. Reefer man.
And Kicking the Gong Around.
Has she been here? Kicking the gong around.
Which was about characters in an opium den. And while Cab did admit to having several vices, fast cars, expensive clothes, gambling, drinking, partying, and women, drugs was never one of his vices. But what really solidified his celebrity was his 1931 song, Minnie the Moocher.
Hey folks, here's the story about Minnie the Moocher. She was a low-down, hoochie-coocher.
Which was the first single by an African-American to sell 1 million records. It was co-written by his manager, Irving Mills. "We created Minnie as a rough, tough character with a heart as big as a whale," says Calloway. Not long after introducing the song, Cab Calloway forgot the lyrics during our radio show. In the middle of a verse, the damn lyrics just went out of my head. I had to fill the space, so I started to scat sing. And the first thing that came to mind was
Hi there, hi there, hi there, hi.
Later, Calloway would even work call and response sections into the song, getting the band and even the audience to sing with him. He would start off with the Heidi, 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 hi, and simple variations, which the audience could repeat back easily, but then his scats would get steadily more difficult until he would finally give them something that they could not respond to, leaving most people in fits of laughter. There seems to be a lot of people that believe Minnie the Moocher dies at the end of the song, mostly due to Cab's wailing out of poor men, poor men, poor men. But she did go on to feature in the sequel song, Minnie the Moocher's Wedding Day.
I heard somebody say, it's Minnie the Moocher's wedding day.
While the band frequently played at the Cotton Club, Calloway also toured the country and even Europe. And the band grew in popularity in 1932 after Minnie the Moocher was featured in both the film The Big Broadcast as well as in a Betty Boop cartoon, Minnie the Moocher. Between money made from the Cotton Club and the success of Minnie, Calloway was able to afford chartered trains for his band. In this way, they were able to avoid the segregation that came from racism while they toured the South. Minnie, along with St. James Infirmary Blues and The Old Man of the Mountain, were performed for the Betty Boop animated shorts, but more on that later. In 1941, Calloway fired Dizzy Gillespie from his orchestra after an onstage riot erupted when Calloway was hit with spitballs. He wrongly accused Gillespie, who then stabbed Calloway in the leg with a small knife. In 1943, Calloway appeared in the high-profile 20th Century Fox musical film Stormy Weather. Stormy Weather was one of the first films that featured an all-black cast. A year later, he wrote and published the new Cab Calloway's Hepster Dictionary, Language of Jive, in which Calloway set about translating jive for fans who might not know certain terms. For example, that kicking the gong around from Minnie the Moocher was a reference to smoking opium. In 1947, Calloway and his band started Heidi Ho, an all-black full-length film directed by Josh Binney, and caricatures of Calloway appeared in the Porky Pig cartoons Porky at the Crocodero and the Swooner Crooner. When the era of big bands ended, Cab Calloway and his orchestra would disband in 1948, and he would condense his group into a sextet. He would also meet and marry Zulme Nuffy McNeil. The pair would reside on Long Beach on the south shore of Long Island, on the border with the neighboring Lido Beach. In the 1950s, Calloway moved his family to Westchester County, New York, where he and Nuffy raised their daughters, Chris, Cecilia, and Cabela Calloway. In his later career, Calloway appeared in a number of films and stage productions that used both his singing and acting talents, and he appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show on March 19, 1967, with his daughter, Chris Calloway. Also in 1967, he co-starred opposite Pearl Bailey as Horace Vandergelder in an all-black cast change of Hello Dolly on Broadway during its original run. Chris Calloway also joined the cast as Minnie Fay. The new cast revived the show as it was slowly falling out of the public's favor, and RCA Victor released a new cast recording, which was rare for the time. In 1973 to 1974, Calloway was featured in an unsuccessful Broadway revival of The Pajama Game alongside Hal Linden and Barbara McNair. His autobiography, Of Minnie the Moocher and Me, was published in 1976. It included his complete Hepster's Dictionary as an appendix. Renewed interest in Calloway occurred in 1980 when he appeared in the hit film The Blues Brothers, performing Minnie the Moocher. He also sang the Jumpin' Jive with a two-headed monster on the children's TV series Sesame Street. This was also the year that the cult film Forbidden Zone was released, which included rearrangements of and homages to Calloway songs written by a huge Calloway fan, Danny Elfman, and performed by Elfman and his band, the Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo, later shortened to just Oingo Boingo.
Well, son, let me tell you, I'm so pleased to meet you. The boys and I've been expecting to greet you as guests of honor in the house of the dead. Just relax, lay yourself down, say goodbye to your head.
Cab Calloway also appeared on an episode of The Love Boat and in the music video for All Right by Janet Jackson. He appeared as Kay's father in the music video for K7 and the Swing Kids' Heidi Ho. He acted as a mentor and friend to the young men of the group. In the UK, Calloway appeared in several commercials for the hula hoop snack, both as himself and as a voice for a cartoon. In one of the commercials, he sang a variation of Minnie the Moocher.
Gather round, here's the hula cutie with the soft sound.
Hoop it, swoop it round and back, hoop it. You'll soon get the knack, hoop it.
Make way there, Mike. Hoopa, loopa, hoop hula. She do a loop and a loop. Wow, he flew that bad bandicoot now. Boo-hoo, he's scooping her hoop. Hear what I say, eat don't hula.
Hoop it.
Hula, hula, hula down. Eat it. Skeet a beat around. Word it. Scoop a loop and how. Hoopa, loopa, eat don't hula.
There was a hula hoopin' trooper who loved to strut her hoopa loopa. Don't give two hoots for Bandicoot till he just swoop in his cute zoot suit. Whoopa loopa hula hoop. Whoopa loopa hula hoop. A hoopa loopa island. Now this Bandicoot did toot. Thou shalt not hula with your hoop. And he did scoop it with a whoop, eat the hula. And Rudy Tooty scooted with his loot. Eat the hula, eat the hula, eat the hula.
a hooly hooly cutie. Love to hula boola hoop. She preferred to hoop a loop than to eat a hula hoop. Hoop a loop a hula hoop. Hoop a hula hoop. A walla balla hula hoop. A walla balla hula hoop. But a hungry bandicoot said don't hula with your hoop. You should eat it with one swoop. Eat, don't hula. Hula 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 hula. Hula 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 hula. Hula 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 hula. Eat, don't hula.
In 1993, The Nightmare Before Christmas came out, and Tim Burton in his autobiography has said that Cab Calloway was his loose inspiration for Oogie Boogie, even taking a line from The Old Man in the Mountain.
What you gonna do now?
Gonna do the best I can.
And now, with your permission, I'm going to do my stuff. What are you going to do? I'm going to do the best I can.
He also stated in his autobiography that he asked the film's composer, Danny Elfman, to make Oogie Boogie's song slightly resemble Calloway's song, Minnie the Moocher. However, it's arguable that it sounds more like Calloway's song, The Ghost of Smokey Joe.
And should the moocher walk in, just tell her you've been talking to the ghost of Smokey Joe.
In June 1994, at the age of 86, Calloway suffered a stroke and passed away 5 months later in a nursing home in Hockessin, Delaware. His body was cremated and his ashes were given to his family. And upon the death of his wife, Zolme, his ashes were interred next to her in the Rosewood Mausoleum at Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York. It's hard to ignore the fact that without Cab Calloway, and later on down the line, Little Richard, there would be no Michael Jackson. There would be no Prince. Hell, it's widely believed that Cab Calloway invented the moonwalk in the 30s, a move he simply referred to as the buzz. I have been obsessed with Cab Calloway for decades. I mean, I even wore a zoot suit to prom in homage to Cab. He was a hero to many, but when asked who his heroes were, he had only this to say. I'll tell you who my heroes are. My heroes are the notes, man. The music itself. You understand what I'm saying? I love the music. The music is my hero. So, the music. Let's take it back a bit and look at the history of the St. James Infirmary Blues.
I've got the St. James Infirmary Blues.
St. James Infirmary Blues, sometimes known as Gambler Blues, is one of those songs that has a past that is a path that is hard to find. Not too unlike House of the Rising Sun, whose history is very well done in a video by Polyphonic. I'll put the link below if you want to check it out. Phil Baxter and Carl Moore published a version of Gambler's Blues in 1925. In 1927, Carl Sandburg published a book called The American Song Bag, which contained lyrics for 2 versions of the song called Those Gambler's Blues. However, the song St. James Infirmary Blues is sometimes credited to the songwriter Joe Primrose, a pseudonym for Irving Mills, who held copyrights for several versions of the song, registering the first in 1929. He claimed the rights to this specific title and won a case in the U.S. Supreme Court on this basis, the defendants having failed to produce the documentary evidence required by the court that the song had been known by that name for some years. St. James Infirmary Blues is sometimes said to be based on an 18th century traditional folk song called The Unfortunate Rake, also known as The Unfortunate Lad, or The Young Man Cut Down in His Prime, about a soldier who uses money on prostitutes and then dies of venereal disease. It begins with a frame narrative telling how a soldier encounters one of his comrades dying of venereal disease contracted from a prostitute. In the second half of the song, the dying man proceeds to give his comrade instructions about the arrangements for his funeral. One version of The Unfortunate Rake begins, "As I was a-walking down by the St. James Hospital, I was a-walking down by there one day. What should I spy but one of my comrades, all wrapped up in flannel, though warm was the day. The dying man later instructs, get 6 young soldiers to carry my coffin, 6 young girls to sing me a song, and each of them carry a bunch of green laurel, so they don't smell me as they bear me along." When the song was carried to America, it naturally took on a new, distinctly American tone. In the Old West, it appeared as a cowboy ballad, The Streets of Laredo, with the funeral instructions taking on a new image more appropriate to cowboys. Get 6 jolly cowboys to carry my coffin, 6 dance hall maidens to bear up my pall. Throw punches of roses over my coffin, roses to deaden the clods as they fall. In the American South of the 1920s and 30s, the song reemerged as St. James Infirmary Blues, with notable recordings by Louis Armstrong.
I went down to St. James Infirmary.
And of course, Cab Calloway. The melody and chord structure was shifted from major to minor, and the funeral instructions took on a new swagger as recorded by Calloway.
When I die, bury me in my straight leg breeches. Put on a box-back coat and a Stetson hat. Put a $20 gold piece on my watch chain, so you can let all the boys know I died standing pat.
This is all perfectly animated for Fleischer Studios' version of Snow White. The short is a retelling of the classic fairy tale Snow White by Fleischer Studios, using some of the studio's trademark characters Betty Boop, Bimbo, and Coco the Clown. Betty Boop plays the titular Snow White, while Bimbo and Coco play guards who disobey the evil queen's order to execute Betty, who sees Betty Boop as a threat to her title as fairest in the land. Snow White was animated by Roland Crandall and directed by Dave Fleischer, one of the 2 brothers that owned Fleischer Studios, which was based in New York. Cab Calloway voiced Coco's performance and also served as direct inspiration for Coco's dance during the song thanks to a technique called rotoscoping. Rotoscoping is an animation technique created and patented by Max Fleischer, where animators would take live action footage, projected frame by frame, and trace it onto paper, either to use the motion reference or directly copy it into their work. It's been used a lot in shows like Undone, and in movies like A Scanner Darkly. It's a beautiful piece of art that continues to enthrall me, and I'm not the only one. Since Cab's version, there has been many covers.
I went down to St. James Infirmary. I saw my baby there. Was stretched out on a long white table.
So cold, and so cool, and so fair.
But let her go, God bless the girl wherever she may be.
She can fast the whole wide world over.
But you'll never find another sweetheart like me.
St. James Infirmary Blues comes in at 109 beats per minute. Changing the narrative of St. James Infirmary Blues to be that of a grieving loved one was a smart move by Louis Armstrong and Cab Calloway. It makes the song heartbreaking. The narrator gets hit with the depression so hard that the only thing that he is focused on is preparing his friends for what to do when he dies from the blues of losing his girl. It's devastating, especially because we all have had or currently have the love that we would just not exist without. This week's Love Homework is another song that mourns the loss of a loved one, this time by means of a breakup, and that is Bambi by Jadena.
Bambi, Bambi, ah, Bambi, my dear, my dear, my dear.
This week's Horror Homework is a Japanese movie from 2005 called Reincarnation. Another one of these movies that you should go in blind with. It's a great wibbly-wobbly ass time travel movie, but not really, and I love it. And like all episodes where the artist has sadly passed, I will cast the Cab Calloway biopic. This one was a hard one, but with a little bit of help, I narrowed it down to Giancarlo Esposito. I think he would nail it. Only one episode left, my spoopies, and it's going to be a doozy. So subscribe, hit the bell, and leave a like below. Until next time, remember that if you're a virgin, don't go lighting any mystical candles with a complete lore, and remember, you heard it in a love song.